feel like sourdough is coming back into the spotlight recently. Well, if you are starting to feel a little bit like you're missing out, or you want to simplify your current sourdough routine, you're in the right spot, because today we're going to talk about my simple, no-fail sourdough routine that I have been making for the past year. Sourdough is delicious, it is easier for your body to digest, and it's also economical. And I have learned that not all cooking from scratch is actually that economical. So I will share the cost breakdown at the end of today's video. But to give some context for this video, I found when I was learning how to do sourdough, reading blogs and watching videos, that a lot of them really overcomplicated the process and actually made me really scared to just start it. What actually made me feel confident enough to try it was a friend welcoming me into her kitchen and telling me exactly what she did and what time frames to start with. And then I was able to just try it. And honestly, I haven't had a fail. Like this, it doesn't fail. Like it always works. Some of that is mindset, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but let's go ahead and dive into this recipe. I'm going to share just a very basic loaf. We're going to start here. You can do more fancy things once you get more confident with that, but we're going to just start with the most basic that we can possibly do. Let's do this.
So let's start off with a good old ingredient list. This is where it gets real exciting because there's like no ingredients at all. It's flour, water, and salt. That is it. You will also need a Dutch oven, but that's the only like supply that you really need. The rest you can get away with not using, and I have done it many different ways, gotten away with it. But the thing that you are going to have to start with is a sourdough starter. This is pretty much the collection of that good bacteria stuff that makes it all bubbly and grows. So this is something that you'll have to either make yourself or you can buy it on Facebook Marketplace. I had a friend who had some. I considered like selling some in the area for any of my local followers, but I found so many on Facebook Marketplace that looked a lot more legit than I do. So just look in your area and see if you could get it from a friend. But once you have your starter, you're going to want to feed this before you make bread. It doesn't have to be once a week, and it could be more than once a week. The sourdough starter is a whole colony of yeast and bacteria, and they need to be fed enough food. So you do have to discard, but trust me, you're not going to waste this. I have so many recipes that I can link down below of things that you can do with this, but you want to discard enough so that you are not feeding a whole ton of these little good guys bacteria stuff in here, because that would end up, you would just have so much sourdough starter. So what I like to do is transfer all but 1/3 into a small Tupperware container that I keep in my fridge, and then to the 1/3 cup sourdough starter I add 1 cup of flour. I don't know why I didn't pull out my funnel for this. I was being lazy, but honestly just make just a mess. And then to this I add 1/3 cup of water. I just use tap water. I know I break the rule, but you're not supposed to use tap water, I guess, because it has some chlorine that can kill the yeast. But listen, guys, I still haven't failed, so I don't know if I should believe it. But I go ahead and mix this up. I do sometimes have to add just like a little splash more of water just to allow it to mix a little better. A rule that I'm kind of breaking here is I don't like to measure anything by weight. I just find that too cumbersome. And so when I have done this though by weight, it ends up being a lot thinner. But let me tell you something, is the thinner consistency does the exact same thing as the thicker consistency to my loaf, I find. So I don't think it really matters that much. I did end up adding a little splash of water to this one so that I could mix it a little better. And then once it's all mixed, you're going to set this on the counter and allow this to rest until it doubles in size. And as soon as it has doubled in size, it is ready to bake. The only note that I want to make is that you want to make sure your lid isn't sealed on, not so that new air can get in, but that actually old air from the bacteria they're breathing out, that needs to come out. So I just rest my mason jar lid on top and it does just fine. About 2.5 hours later, around 7, this is what it looked like, almost doubled.
Now it is 8 o'clock and you can see that it's kind of started accelerating. So it's getting exciting.
And then honestly, I forgot about this and almost forgot to mix it up before I went to bed, but I did not forget. I remembered for you guys. And so this is when we are going to mix up the dough. This is about 10 p.m. here. Lately, I've been making a double batch, but if you're just starting out, I wouldn't recommend doing that because it's just like a lot of bread. And I mean, sometimes I don't know how we actually eat that much bread. It's a little bit concerning, but I will make 2 smaller bowls for you guys so that you can see the exact process that you should do. And so here I am transferring the sourdough starter into my measuring cup, that 1/3 cup. Again, this is like the best recipe because you can memorize it so easily. All of the measurements are even. So 1/3 cup of sourdough starter, and then you're going to whisk this into 1 3/4 cup of water. And so I just kind of let that sit in there a little while to let it dissolve, and then I whisk it with a fork to get it all nice and incorporated. And then to my bowl, I add 4 cups of flour and 2 teaspoons of salt. We're gonna mix that all together, and then to that you will add the water. The consistency that I get, I think, is a little bit more wet than the ones that I've seen on social media and like bloggers and stuff, but it still works. I think just because there's variations in the temperature of the home and the humidity of the house, all those things can make a difference, but it'll still work. Like it'll still taste really good. So that's why I consider this just like a no fail. Don't overthink it. That's the key. Don't overthink it. I think people get really hung up on the timing and feeling like they have to baby this sourdough process, but really the most important thing to focus on is just getting this dough ready for the bulk ferment. So this is when it's going to need to sit for 6 to 8 hours to really activate, do all the things. Again, I'm no scientist, but I like to do this before we go to sleep. And then the next step in the morning will actually be to slow down that process by putting it into the fridge. And that gives you so much flexibility. I've heard of people like leaving it in there for even a few days. There was pollen in the rosemary that I pulled from our yard. If you know Florida, you know that we are having so much pollen this year, but I wanted to add a little bit of rosemary into one of these loaves, you know, just to be a little bit fancy. But again, this is absolutely unnecessary. Now, this is called the stretch and fold. So it's been about 20 minutes, which is when it is appropriate to do a stretch and fold. So you're going to wet your hands, and then I just grab the dough and kind of swing it so that it stretches and flop it over on itself. Honestly, at this point in time, I'm like just ready to go to bed. So I just get this done. Sometimes I've forgotten to do this, and it kind of just doesn't like get as much fluffiness to it, I guess. But it still worked. I just did those stretch and folds in the morning when I woke up, and it was fine. But I try to do 2 stretch and folds before I go to sleep. So here I am doing 1 of those stretch and folds, and then the next one I'm going to do after I take a shower. Here, there's my robe, you can see. And so I'm just doing the second one to get it all nice, and I guess this adds like air bubbles to it. It helps it come together is what I have read on blogs. I don't even know what that means, but it works. A few stretch and folds, but don't worry about like bringing it with you to places, because as long as you do them at some point, it'll be fine. So now it's around at 10:30 and I am headed to bed. The next step will be in the morning after that bulk ferment. And one of my favorite things to do is peek on the bread, because you will see just how much it has risen. You want to allow it to double, but not to do any more than that double. If you let it go too far, it can just get kind of over fermented. You'll see that phrase, as well as like overhydrated, I think. I don't know if that's the same thing actually, so don't quote me on that. But I think that what happens, what I've noticed, is the loaf will just end up getting really flat, kind of loses its structure in a way. So what I'm doing here is putting some parchment paper into a smaller bowl. This is going to help shape it until I am ready to bake it. I want to slow down the fermentation process now until I'm ready to bake it, which will be later after I do school drop off and like we'll run errands and stuff, and then I'll come back and bake it. And it works out fine. So this loaf is a little jello-y, so I added a lot of flour to my hands so that it wouldn't be super sticky. Sometimes it's like this, sometimes it isn't. You just, I don't know exactly. I think it has a lot to do with weather, and we've had our windows open a ton, so it's definitely like super humid in our house. I did want to mention too, like I used a plate on top of my bowl, but you could also use a wet tea towel. Some people prefer doing that. I've just started using the plate recently, and maybe that is something to do with why mine is a little bit more floppy than other times, but you do want to keep it covered so that it can not get like a crust on it. So what I was doing there is just picking it up from the center. This is another form of the stretch and folds that I learned through my recipe, and so I'm just plopping that into the parchment lined bowl. And then this next one I am going to do using my, I don't forget what this is called now, a Banton bun. I'm not exactly sure actually. It's like a basket though, and it has lines on it that make a really beautiful design on my loaf. So I ended up getting this for Christmas this year. I just wanted something to kind of make things fancy in the kitchen. This was one of those like practical things that I just had been putting off getting. So completely unnecessary, but again, this one was pretty gooey. So I went ahead and added a lot of flour to my hands and to the surface. This is what you can do if it's just like a little too gooey and unmanageable, but I've had other times when my loaf is not like this, like it's a lot more firm, I guess, and you just never know. So I'm kind of just rolling it up to get the shape back a little bit, and then there's something you can do to add tension, which is where you kind of use your hands to turn it into a circular motion, and it kind of, you can think about it stretching the skin on the top of the loaf and pushing everything else under it, and how this would add tension to the entire loaf. I'm not sure if that makes perfect sense, but I'm going to make sure that this is dusted really, really well with flour so that it doesn't stick to the inside of my shaping basket thing. And then I just transfer this into that basket, and then this basket goes into the fridge. And I think this day, actually, we were having a sick day, so I ended up baking this in the morning. We've been having a lot of sick days in this house lately. I am preheating the oven to 450 degrees with the Dutch oven inside of it. That's really important so that it can get nice and hot.
Yep. All right.
So now that loaf that I did first, that I put in the parchment paper in the fridge, I didn't need to transfer it out of that bowl yet. I'll show you how I did that one. But this one does need to be placed on parchment paper. So I floured that surface nicely, and then I just flip over the loaf and it kind of falls out. Definitely didn't fall very even there. So I just worked on kind of scooching it over using that same circular technique to kind of add some tension. I don't know if this is how you're really supposed to do it. You're probably supposed to just aim better when you drop it out of the shaping basket, but this worked out just fine. And then it is time to do your scoring. So people get so fancy with the scoring, and I've done some that turn out really beautiful and some that don't. So all that I like to do is use some scissors. I do have one of those razors that you're supposed to use to make it really pretty and stuff, but you can honestly just use scissors or a knife, and then you just use the parchment paper to lift it up into your very hot Dutch oven. So here I am using kitchen scissors to make those cuts, and you'll see how these turn out. I forget if these actually turned out well. I think they did. And then you are going to use a knife also if you want. So I don't know. We'll see how this one turns out. I never really know. And then the lid goes back on, and this goes into the oven for 45 minutes. So make sure you set your timer. I don't always remember. That's my kryptonite. And then once that has been 45 minutes, I like to take the lid off and allow it to be there for about 2 minutes in there without the lid, and that gives it a nice brown color on top. This is the second loaf going in. I just try to keep an assembly line going. You guys know I keep it real on this channel. And this was supposed to be a no-fail recipe. Well, the second loaf was a bit of a fail just because I forgot to set that second timer for the 2 minutes to get it brown on top, and it definitely got very brown on top and bottom. But I will show you how I salvaged it, because there is really no fail, and this turned out to actually be something super delicious. So here on the right is the loaf that went in first. It has the rosemary in it, and I used the shaping basket thing. And then here on the left is the one that went in second, and I just kind of plopped into a bowl, and this is how I did it for a long time, and it just works fine. But it is definitely very burnt on the bottom. I couldn't even get all the parchment paper off, but I will show you in just a bit exactly what I did to make this into something really delicious. But let's cut into this bread. There's something called the crumb, and that is the amount of holes and how evenly spaced apart they are and how big they are and all of that. But I have had some that are much more fluffy and airy, and then sometimes they're not exactly, and that's okay. It's a little bit more dense. But I think that there's too much detail out there. To just get started is the best thing to do, because what you will notice is that this process is so incredibly satisfying. Here on this channel, I share a lot about thrifting and DIY, and I think that we all really share in common the ability to work for something a little bit harder than just going to the store and buying it. So while this is a cheaper way to have really amazing high quality food, I think that it's more about the whole process of procuring this food for my family that I really, really enjoy, and I enjoy the artistry of it and learning the whole process as I go. So I hope that that can be encouraging, and I hope that's what you can take away from this video, even if you don't start sourdough, but I think everyone should. I use that discard to make a pizza, which is on Farmhouse on Boone's recipe, and then we just had this with soup because we were all feeling pretty sick. So if you would give this video a like, I would so appreciate that. Comment down below if it was helpful, what I did with that burnt loaf. I mean, it was pretty much a frisbee at the bottom, so I cut that off. I couldn't even get the parchment paper off of it. And then to the part that was salvageable, I went ahead and chopped this up into cubes, and I turned it into a sourdough strata, which I shared in the fall for some cozy fall budget-friendly meals. So I will link that video down below. So let me know in the comments below if you have any questions at all, and maybe we can have some good conversation down in there. But we're gonna get back to prepping for this baby, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.